A teen mocked a soldier. Then Stallone walked onto the court. Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The community center's basketball court thrummed with the squeak of sneakers, the rhythmic thump of a dribbled ball, and the shouts of a dozen or so teenagers engaged in a fiercely contested pickup game. It was a Friday afternoon, the air thick with the scent of adolescent sweat and the lingering aroma of cheap pizza from a nearby concession stand. On the worn wooden bleachers that lined one side of the court, a man sat alone, his presence a quiet counterpoint to the youthful energy exploding before him. This was Elias, his weathered face thoughtful, his eyes the color of a fading denim sky, observant. He wasn't a coach, nor a parent of any of the players. He was simply there, a man who often found himself drawn to the unvarnished dramas of everyday life, to the places where human nature revealed itself in its most unguarded moments. He held a small, well-worn leather-bound journal in his lap, its pages filled with his neat, almost microscopic script, observations, reflections, fragments of stories overheard or imagined. In his pocket, his fingers idly traced the outline of a tarnished bronze star, a medal that had belonged not to him, but to a younger brother lost long ago in a forgotten conflict, a brother whose quiet courage and unwavering sense of duty had profoundly shaped Elias's own moral compass. His attention was drawn to a particular dynamic unfolding on the court. One boy, taller and more aggressive than the others, seemed to dominate the game, not just through skill, but through an overbearing, almost bullying demeanor. His name, Elias had overheard, was Jake. Jake was all swagger and trash talk, his triumphs celebrated with exaggerated fist pumps, his teammates' errors met with scathing criticism. Playing on the opposing team was a smaller, quieter boy named Sam. Sam was clearly less experienced, his movements often hesitant, his shots frequently missing their mark. Yet, he played with a quiet determination, a refusal to give up despite Jake's relentless taunts and the increasingly frustrated sighs of his own teammates. After a particularly clumsy turnover by Sam, Jake intercepted the ball, drove to the basket for an easy layup, then swaggered back down the court, his voice dripping with scorn. "Man, Henderson," Jake sneered, deliberately mispronouncing Sam's last name. "You play like my grandpa." "No, wait, my grandpa could probably school you." At least he actually did something with his life, fought in a real war, not like some loser soldier who probably just pushed paper his whole career. Sam flinched as if struck. His face flushed a deep crimson, his eyes dropping to the floor. He didn't retort, didn't defend himself. He simply absorbed the cruel remark, his small shoulders slumping under its weight. The other players, caught in the awkwardness of the moment, either laughed uncomfortably or pretended not to have heard. Even the adult supervisor, a harried-looking man who seemed more interested in his phone than in the game, offered no intervention. Elias watched, his own jaw tightening. The casual cruelty of Jake's words, the deliberate twisting of service into an insult, the targeting of Sam's unseen, unknown father. It was a microcosm of a larger, more insidious disrespect he had witnessed too often in the world. The bronze star in his pocket felt suddenly heavy, a burning reproach. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he could not let this pass. This wasn't just about a schoolyard taunt. It was about honor, about sacrifice, about the often invisible wounds carried by those who served and by the families who supported them. He closed his journal, the story he had been trying to capture momentarily forgotten, replaced by a far more immediate, more urgent narrative unfolding before him. He rose slowly from the bleachers, his movements deliberate, his gaze fixed not on Jake, the aggressor, but on Sam, the boy whose quiet dignity had been so carelessly, so cruelly assaulted. The squeak of sneakers and the thud of the ball seemed to fade as Elias began to move, a quiet, unassuming figure propelled by a deep, unwavering sense of justice. Elias didn't immediately confront Jake. He knew that a direct, aggressive approach would likely only escalate the situation, entrenching Jake in his arrogance and further humiliating Sam. Instead, he waited for a natural break in the game, a moment when the players gathered to catch their breath, to rehydrate. He approached Sam quietly, his demeanor gentle, non-threatening. The boy was sitting on the edge of the court, his head bowed, tracing patterns in the dust with the toe of his sneaker. He looked small, defeated, utterly alone. "Sam," Elias said, his voice low, calm. The boy looked up, his eyes still holding a flicker of the pain Jake's words had inflicted. He clearly didn't recognize Elias, and a wary, defensive expression crossed his face. "It takes courage to keep playing, Sam," Elias continued, "especially when things aren't going your way, when others are unkind." Sam didn't respond, his gaze dropping back to the floor. He seemed to expect further criticism, or perhaps unwanted pity. "That was a cruel thing," Jake said. Elias stated, not as a question, but as a simple acknowledgement of the truth. "About your father." At the mention of his father, Sam's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a mixture of pain and a fierce, protective loyalty. "He doesn't know anything about my dad." Sam burst out, his voice trembling. My dad's a hero." The words were a raw, desperate cry, a defense of an honor he felt had been unjustly assailed. Elias nodded slowly. "I believe you, Sam," he said, "and I believe heroism takes many forms. Not all of them involve battlefield glory or public parades. Sometimes the greatest courage is quiet, unseen, found in the everyday sacrifices, the unwavering commitment to duty, the silent bearing of burdens for the sake of others." Sam stared at him, his initial defensiveness softening slightly, replaced by a dawning, hesitant curiosity. Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Elias Thorne," Elias replied. "And I knew a few heroes in my time, Sam. Men and women whose courage wasn't always recognized, wasn't always celebrated. But it was real, and it mattered." He paused, then asked gently, "Your father, is he still serving?" Sam shook his head, a shadow crossing his face. "No, he got hurt. A long time ago. He doesn't talk about it much. But he's different now." The boy's voice was filled with an unspoken sorrow, a hint of a burden far too heavy for his young shoulders. Elias understood. He had seen it before, the invisible wounds of war, the scars that lingered long after the physical injuries had healed. He thought of his own brother, of the light that had been extinguished from his eyes after his return from that forgotten conflict. "Sometimes, Sam," Elias said softly, "the battles fought after the war are the hardest ones of all. The battles fought within oneself. And it takes a very special kind of courage to face those." He then turned his attention to the other side of the court, where Jake was preening, accepting the congratulations of his teammates for another successful shot. Jake hadn't noticed Elias speaking with Sam. He was too absorbed in his own perceived glory. Elias knew he had to address Jake, but not yet. First, he needed to offer Sam something more than just words of comfort. He needed to offer him a sense of validation, a reminder that his father's service, whatever its nature, whatever its cost, was worthy of respect, of honor. The Bronze Star in his pocket felt like a silent instruction. Elias reached into his jacket pocket and slowly withdrew the tarnished Bronze Star. He didn't polish it, didn't make a show of its presentation. He simply held it in his weathered palm, its metallic coolness a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. He offered it to Sam, not as a gift, but as a testament. "This medal, Sam," Elias said, his voice quiet but resonant, "belonged to someone I knew, someone very brave. He didn't win it for scoring points in a game, or for making a lot of noise. He earned it for an act of quiet courage, for putting the safety of others before his own, in a place where danger was very real and recognition was very rare." Sam stared at the medal, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and a dawning understanding. He reached out a tentative finger and gently touched its raised, five-pointed surface, its central, smaller star. "Wow," he breathed. "He must have been really something." He was, Elias affirmed. But the thing about true heroism, Sam, is that it often doesn't look like what we see in movies or what people like Jake might imagine. It's not always about dramatic gestures or public acclaim. Sometimes it's about enduring. It's about persevering in the face of adversity. It's about fulfilling your duty day in and day out, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching, even when the personal cost is great. He paused, then looked directly into Sam's eyes. Your father, Sam, whether he pushed paper or faced enemy fire, whether his wounds are visible or hidden deep inside, he served. He answered a call that many ignore. And that, in itself, is an act of courage worthy of the deepest respect. Don't ever let anyone, especially someone as ignorant and unkind as Jake, tell you otherwise. Sam's eyes welled with tears, but this time, they were not tears of shame or humiliation. They were tears of gratitude, of a profound, heartfelt validation. He looked from the bronze star in Elias's hand to Elias's face, a silent thank you passing between them. My dad, Sam stammered, his voice thick with emotion. He has nightmares sometimes, and he gets quiet for days. Mom says it's because of what he saw, what he went through. She says he's the bravest man she knows. Your mother is a wise woman, Sam, Elias said gently. And she is right. The quiet battles are often the fiercest, and the scars they leave, though invisible, can be the most profound. He closed his hand over the bronze star, then placed it carefully back in his pocket. That medal, he said, is a symbol, a reminder. But the true honor, Sam, lies not in the medal, but in the spirit of the one who earned it, and in the spirit of those, like you, who continue to love and support them, even when it's difficult, even when you don't fully understand. He then straightened, his gaze shifting towards the other end of the court, where Jake was now attempting a series of flamboyant, unnecessary dunks, his laughter loud and arrogant. And now, Sam, Elias said, his voice taking on a new, firmer tone, I believe it's time Mr. Jake Henderson was offered a slightly different perspective on the nature of heroism and the meaning of respect. Sam looked a little alarmed, but also, for the first time that afternoon, a flicker of something like hope, like fight, ignited in his eyes. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He wasn't alone anymore. Someone understood. Someone was willing to stand with him. And that, Elias knew, could make all the difference in the world. Elias walked slowly, deliberately, across the basketball court, his worn leather shoes making almost no sound on the polished wood. The pickup game had momentarily paused, the players watching his approach with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Jake, who had just completed another showy dunk, turned, a cocky grin on his face, clearly expecting admiration. His grin faltered, then vanished completely, as he saw the quiet, unassuming older man walking directly towards him, an unreadable expression in those storm-weathered eyes. Jake, is it? Elias said, his voice calm, even, yet carrying an undeniable weight that seemed to cut through the ambient noise of the gym. Jake, momentarily thrown off by the direct address from a stranger, could only manage a sullen, yeah? What of it? My name is Elias Thorne, Elias continued, stopping a few feet away from the boy. And I believe you owe an apology to young Sam over there. He gestured towards Sam, who was still sitting on the edge of the court, watching with wide, anxious eyes. Jake scoffed, his arrogance quickly reasserting itself. Apologize? To him? For what? For telling the truth? The kid plays like a loser, and his old man probably was a loser soldier. What's the big deal? The other teenagers, who had gathered around, exchanged uneasy glances. They sensed this was more than just a typical schoolyard dispute. There was a gravity to Elias, a quiet intensity that was both unsettling and compelling. The big deal, Jake, Elias said, his voice still calm, but now edged with a steely firmness, is that you used words as weapons. You belittled a boy for his efforts, and you dishonored the service of a man you know nothing about, a man who, by all accounts, has sacrificed a great deal for reasons you clearly cannot comprehend. Hey, I was just kidding around. Jake protested, though his bravado was beginning to sound a little hollow. It was just trash talk. Everyone does it. There is a difference, Jake, Elias countered, between spirited competition and deliberate cruelty, between trash talk and a callous disregard for another human being's dignity. You crossed that line. And you crossed it by a very wide margin. He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. Jake, despite his physical advantage, seemed to shrink back slightly under the intensity of Elias's scrutiny. You spoke of Sam's father as a loser soldier, Elias continued, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, more intense. Let me tell you a little something about soldiers, Jake. About the men and women who wear that uniform, who answer that call. They don't do it for glory, most of them. They don't do it for fame. They do it out of a sense of duty, of commitment, of a willingness to put themselves in harm's way for something larger than themselves. Whether they serve on the front lines or behind a desk, whether they face enemy fire or the relentless, soul-crushing boredom of a remote posting, they serve. And that service, Jake, deserves our respect, not our scorn. He paused, letting his words sink in. Jake was silent now, his earlier arrogance replaced by a sullen, defensive resentment. He avoided Elias's gaze, staring at a point somewhere over Elias's shoulder. You don't know what battles Sam's father has fought, Jake, Elias said, his voice softer now, but no less firm. You don't know what sacrifices he has made, what burdens he still carries. To dismiss his service, to call him a loser, without knowing a single thing about him, is not just ignorant, Jake. It is shameful. The word shameful hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Jake flushed, a dark red rising from his neck. He opened his mouth to retort, then seemed to think better of it. He was clearly unaccustomed to being confronted in this way, to having his casual cruelty so directly, so unequivocally challenged. The other teenagers watched in silence, their expressions a mixture of fascination and a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. The game was forgotten. A different kind of contest was being played out now, a contest of character, of values. And Jake, for all his physical prowess, was clearly outmatched. Jake shifted uncomfortably under Elias's steady gaze, the silence on the basketball court broken only by the distant, indifferent hum of the community center's ventilation system. His usual coterie of admirers, the ones who usually laughed at his taunts and basked in his reflected aggression, now stood a little apart, their expressions uneasy, their loyalty wavering in the face of this unexpected moral confrontation. Look, Mr. Jake finally mumbled, his voice losing much of its earlier bravado. I didn't mean anything by it, all right? It was just words. Kids say stuff like that all the time. Words have power, Jake, Elias replied, his voice still calm, but with an underlying intensity that brooked no dismissal. They can build up, or they can tear down. They can heal, or they can wound. And the words you chose today, Jake, they were designed to wound, to humiliate, to diminish another human being, and to disrespect the service of someone you've never even met. He paused, then continued. You say kids say stuff like that all the time. Perhaps they do, but does that make it right? Does that excuse the casual cruelty, the thoughtless disregard for another's feelings, for another's dignity? Or does it simply mean that too many young people are learning the wrong lessons about what it means to be strong, what it means to be a man? Jake scuffed his sneaker against the polished floor, his gaze still averted. He was clearly out of his depth, his usual arsenal of taunts and deflections useless against Elias's quiet, principled stand. What do you want from me, huh? Jake muttered, a hint of his earlier belligerence returning, though it sounded more like a desperate defense now than a genuine challenge. An apology, Jake, Elias stated simply. A genuine apology. Tosam. And perhaps a little quiet reflection on your part about the kind of person you want to be, the kind of impact you want to have on the world around you. He then did something that seemed to surprise everyone, including Jake. He reached into his pocket and took out the tarnished bronze star. He didn't offer it to Jake, didn't use it as a weapon. He simply held it in his open palm, its metallic surface catching the harsh fluorescent light. This, Elias said, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, belonged to my younger brother. He was not much older than you, Jake, when he earned this. He earned it not for his skill on a basketball court, not for his ability to talk trash, but for an act of selfless courage in a place where death was a constant companion. He never came home from that place, Jake. He gave us today for our tomorrow. The raw, understated emotion in Elias's voice, the quiet dignity with which he spoke of his brother's sacrifice, seemed to finally penetrate Jake's thick hide of arrogance. Jake looked at the medal, then at Elias's face, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than anger or resentment appeared in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, or a dawning, uncomfortable understanding of the profound disrespect he had shown. The other teenagers were silent, their earlier amusement completely gone, replaced by a somber, reflective attentiveness. The weight of Elias's words, the tangible symbol of his brother's sacrifice, had transformed the atmosphere on the court. This was no longer about a schoolyard squabble. It was about something far deeper, far more fundamental. It was about honor, sacrifice, and the enduring importance of respect. Sam, still sitting on the edge of the court, watched Jake with a new, almost pitying expression. He had been the target of Jake's cruelty, but now, in a strange way, he seemed to be the stronger of the two. He had his father's honor and his own quiet dignity. Jake, for all his bluster, had only his shame. The silence that descended upon the basketball court was heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. Jake stared at the bronze star in Elias's hand, his face a mask of conflicting feelings. The bravado had completely vanished, replaced by a raw, uncomfortable vulnerability. He looked like a boy who had just been forced to confront a truth about himself he didn't like, a truth he could no longer ignore. Elias didn't press him, didn't demand an immediate apology. He simply stood there, holding the medal, allowing the weight of the moment, the unspoken testament of his brother's sacrifice, to do its work. He knew that true remorse, genuine understanding, could not be coerced. It had to come from within. After what felt like an eternity, Jake slowly lifted his head. His eyes, when they met Elias's, were no longer filled with arrogance or defiance. They were filled with a dawning, painful shame. I didn't know, Jake stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. About your brother. And about what I said to Sam. It was stupid. And mean. I was just trying to be tough. The confession, when it finally came, was raw, unadorned, stripped of all pretense. It was the sound of a boy's carefully constructed facade crumbling, revealing the insecure, frightened child beneath. Elias nodded slowly. It takes a certain kind of courage to admit when you're wrong, Jake, he said, his voice gentle now, devoid of accusation. And perhaps a different kind of courage to understand what true toughness really means. He closed his hand over the bronze star, then returned it to his pocket. My brother, he continued, he wasn't the biggest man nor the loudest, but he was the bravest man I ever knew, because his courage came not from a need to dominate others, but from a deep, unwavering commitment to his principles, to his comrades, to doing what was right, no matter the cost. He then looked towards Sam, who was still watching, his expression a mixture of surprise and a dawning, hesitant relief. And Sam's father, Jake, Elias said, his gaze returning to the chastened boy, whatever his role, whatever his experiences, he served. He wore a uniform that represents sacrifice, commitment, a willingness to stand for something larger than oneself. That deserves respect. Always. Jake nodded, his eyes downcast. He looked utterly defeated, yet also, strangely, a little lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from him, the burden of his own arrogance, his own ignorance. He then did something that surprised everyone. He turned and walked slowly toward Sam. The other teenagers watched, holding their breath. Jake stopped in front of Sam, who looked up at him, his expression wary but no longer fearful. Sam, Jake mumbled, his voice still low, still hesitant, but clear enough for everyone to hear. I'm really sorry for what I said about you and about your dad. It was messed up. There's no excuse for it. Sam stared at him for a moment. Then, to Jake's evident surprise, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched Sam's lips. It's okay, Jake, Sam said quietly. Thanks. It wasn't a full absolution, perhaps. The wounds were too fresh for that. But it was a start. It was an acknowledgement of harm done, and an offer, however tentative, of forgiveness. Elias watched the exchange, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over him. He had not sought to humiliate Jake, but to educate him, to awaken his conscience. And perhaps, just perhaps, a seed of understanding, of empathy had been planted. The lesson, it seemed, had been learned. Not just by Jake, but by everyone on that basketball court who had witnessed this quiet, profound drama of disrespect and redemption. The tension on the basketball court had palpably eased, replaced by an almost awkward, yet hopeful, sense of reconciliation. Jake, having offered his apology, seemed unsure what to do next. He stood for a moment, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, then, with a mumbled, game on, he turned and rejoined his teammates, his earlier swagger noticeably absent. The pickup game resumed, but its tenor had changed. The aggressive trash talk was gone, replaced by a more focused, more respectful intensity. Jake, surprisingly, passed the ball more, his plays less about individual showboating and more about team effort. He even offered a quiet word of encouragement to a teammate who missed a shot. Sam, too, seemed different. He played with a new, subtle confidence, his movements less hesitant, his shoulders a little straighter. He still missed a few shots, made a few errors, but he no longer seemed to carry the weight of the world, or at least the weight of Jake's scorn, on his small frame. He even managed to smile when he successfully blocked one of Jake's layups, a smile that Jake, to everyone's surprise, returned with a good-natured shrug. Elias watched this transformation with a quiet, profound satisfaction. He had not delivered a lecture, had not imposed a punishment. He had simply offered a different perspective, a reminder of fundamental values, and had allowed the inherent decency within these young people, however deeply buried, to surface. He saw the adult supervisor, who had been conspicuously absent during the earlier confrontation, now watching the game with a new, more attentive interest, his phone forgotten in his pocket. Perhaps he, too, had learned something. As the game wound down and the teenagers began to gather their belongings, Sam approached Elias, his eyes shining with a gratitude that needed no words. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice still a little shy, but clear and strong. "Thank you for everything." "You're very welcome, Sam," Elias replied, a warm smile touching his own lips. "But it was your own quiet strength and Jake's willingness to listen that truly made the difference today." He placed a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. "Remember what I said, Sam. Your father's service and your own character, those are things to be proud of. Never let anyone diminish that." Sam nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I won't, sir. I promise." Just then, Jake approached them, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his expression a mixture of lingering embarrassment and a newfound, hesitant respect. "Mr. Thorne," Jake said, extending his hand. I just wanted to say thanks. For setting me straight. I acted like a jerk. I won't forget this." Elias shook his hand. "We all make mistakes, Jake," he said. "The important thing is to learn from them, to grow. And to remember that true strength isn't about tearing others down, but about lifting them up." Jake nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. He then turned to Sam. "Hey, Henderson," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Good game. You got heart." Sam grinned, a genuine Thorskrin. "Thanks, Jake. You too." The two boys, antagonists just an hour before, shared a brief, almost awkward, moment of camaraderie, a testament to the transformative power of a lesson learned, a respect rediscovered. Elias watched them, a quiet sense of hope warming his chest. Perhaps, he thought, these small, everyday encounters, these quiet battles for dignity and understanding, were the most important battles of all. They were the battles that shaped character, that forged communities, that kept the flame of human decency alive in a world that often seemed determined to extinguish it. The Bronze Star in his pocket felt like a silent amen. As the teenagers began to disperse, their voices echoing in the now emptying community center, Elias prepared to take his leave as well. He had accomplished what he had set out to do, perhaps more. He had not only defended a young boy's dignity and honored the service of an unseen father, but he had also, perhaps, planted a seed of empathy and respect in the heart of a young man who had desperately needed it. The adult supervisor, a man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to Sam, a coincidence Elias found quietly amusing, approached him, his earlier indifference replaced by a look of genuine gratitude. "Mr. Thorne," he said, extending his hand, I owe you an apology. I should have intervened earlier with Jake. I was distracted. But what you did, what you said, it was remarkable. You taught us all a valuable lesson today. Not just the kids, but me too." Elias shook his hand. "We all have moments when we are less attentive than we should be, Mr. Henderson," he said graciously. "The important thing is to recognize those moments and to strive to do better." "I will, Mr. Thorne," Henderson affirmed, his voice sincere. "I certainly will. And thank you again. For everything." Elias nodded and turned to leave, but he paused as he saw Sam Henderson waiting for him near the exit, his expression a mixture of shyness and a profound, heartfelt gratitude. "Mr. Thorne," Sam began, "I wanted to ask, that medal you showed us, your brother's, was he a hero like in the movies?" Elias smiled faintly. "He was a hero, Sam," he said, "but not like in the movies. His heroism wasn't about dramatic explosions or impossible feats of strength. It was quieter than that. It was about courage in the face of fear. It was about loyalty to his friends. It was about doing his duty, even when it was terrifying, even when he knew he might not come back. That, to me, Sam, is the truest kind of heroism." Sam listened, his eyes wide, absorbing every word. "My dad," he said softly. "He doesn't talk about what happened to him, but sometimes I see a look in his eyes, a sad look, and I know he's remembering things, hard things." "I'm sure he is, Sam," Elias said gently. "And it takes a great deal of courage to live with those memories, to carry those burdens, and to still be a good father, a good man. That's a different kind of battlefield, Sam, and your father is fighting on it every day. That makes him a hero in my book, a very profound one." Sam's eyes shone with a new understanding, a new pride. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," he whispered. "Thank you for helping me see that." "You're welcome, Sam," Elias replied. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Be proud of your father, and be proud of yourself. You have a good heart, and that," he added, with a knowing look, "is a strength far greater than any physical prowess." With a final, warm smile, Elias turned and walked out of the community center, leaving behind a young boy whose understanding of heroism and of his own father had been quietly, profoundly transformed. The Bronze Star in his pocket felt like a quiet benediction. Its story and his brother's had found a new resonance today in the heart of a young boy, and perhaps in the conscience of an entire community. Elias walked through the late afternoon streets, the sounds of the city a familiar, comforting rhythm. He felt a quiet sense of peace, the kind that comes from having acted in accordance with one's deepest convictions, from having made a small but meaningful difference in the lives of others. The encounter at the community center, though unexpected, had been a poignant reminder of the enduring power of empathy, of respect, of the quiet courage it takes to stand up for what is right. He thought of young Sam, his initial pain and humiliation transformed into a newfound pride and understanding. He thought of Jake, his arrogant facade stripped away to reveal a vulnerable, teachable boy. He even thought of Mr. Henderson, the supervisor whose initial indifference had given way to a renewed sense of responsibility. These were small victories, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, but they mattered. They were the quiet affirmations of human decency that, woven together, created the fabric of a just and compassionate society. The Bronze Star, when he took it from his pocket later that evening in the solitude of his small, book-lined room, seemed to gleam with a new, softer light. It was not just a memento of a personal loss, but a symbol of a universal truth, that true heroism lies not in the absence of fear, but in the courage to act in spite of it. Not in the pursuit of personal glory, but in the selfless service to others. Not in the loudness of one's boasts, but in the quiet integrity of one's character. He placed the medal carefully on his worn wooden desk, beside his father's miniature boxing gloves and his wife's carved bird whistle. A small collection of talismans, each representing a different facet of the human spirit, each a reminder of the values he held most dear. He knew that the world would continue to present its challenges, its injustices, its moments when a quiet voice of reason and compassion needed to be heard above the din of arrogance and indifference. And he knew, with a quiet certainty, that he would continue to answer that call, armed not with weapons or wealth, but with the simple, enduring power of his own moral compass, a compass that had been shaped by a lifetime of observation, of reflection, and of an unwavering belief in the inherent goodness, however deeply buried, within every human soul. The story of Jake and Sam, of a thoughtless insult and a quiet lesson in respect, would become another entry in Elias's mental journal, another testament to the complex, often contradictory, but ultimately hopeful, narrative of humanity. And the echoes of that encounter, like the echoes of all true stories, would continue to resonate, a quiet reminder of the enduring importance of honor, sacrifice, and the profound, transformative power of a single, principled stand. The days that followed the incident at the community center settled back into their usual quiet rhythm for Elias. He continued his walks, his observations, his solitary work of chronicling the forgotten narratives of human courage. Yet, something had subtly shifted. He found himself looking at the young people he encountered with a new, more hopeful eye, wondering about the Sams and Jakes among them, about the quiet battles for dignity and understanding that were playing out in their lives, often unseen, unheard. He knew that one afternoon's drama on a basketball court would not magically transform all the Jakes of the world into paragons of empathy, nor would it erase all the hurts experienced by the Sams. But it was a start. It was a reminder that change was possible, that even deeply ingrained attitudes could be challenged, that understanding could, sometimes, triumph over ignorance. He occasionally saw Sam Henderson in the neighborhood, sometimes shooting hoops by himself in the park, sometimes walking with his mother, a quiet, resilient-looking woman whose eyes held a hint of the same gentle strength Elias had seen in her son. Sam always greeted Elias with a warm, respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged that day. And Elias, in turn, would offer a quiet smile of encouragement, a silent affirmation of the boy's inherent worth. He never saw Jake again. Perhaps the boy had found a different place to play, a different audience for his particular brand of bravado. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the lesson he had learned that day had taken root, prompting a deeper, more lasting change in his behavior, in his outlook. Elias hoped it was the latter. He believed in the possibility of redemption, of growth, even for those who seemed most resistant to it. The Bronze Star still rested on his desk, a quiet, constant reminder. It spoke not just of his brother's sacrifice, but the countless sacrifices, large and small, made every day by ordinary people in the quiet pursuit of a better, more just world. It spoke of the courage it takes to confront cruelty, to defend dignity, to choose empathy over indifference. These were the qualities Elias Thorne had dedicated his life to understanding, to chronicling, and, in his own unassuming way, to embodying. And as he continued his solitary journey, he carried with him the quiet conviction that these were the qualities that truly defined the human spirit, the enduring echoes of courage that resonated through the generations, a timeless testament to the best of what we could be. The lesson on the basketball court had been about more than just a thoughtless insult. It had been about the very essence of respect, the foundation upon which all true strength, all true community is built. And that was a lesson worth remembering, worth repeating in every quiet corner of the world.